Welcome to Section 3, Cloud Storage with AWS, S3, and Node.js. In this section, we are going to take a look at the basics of Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS, the AWS Console, AWS Simple Storage Service, also known as AWS S3, the AWS S3 Command Line Tool, AWS S3 CLI, using AWS S3 with our Node.js applications to upload and read files from the cloud, hosting static websites with AWS S3. So this section is going to be all about cloud storage using Amazon Web Services. Getting started with AWS Console and S3. In this video, we are going to look at the basics of Amazon Web Services, the AWS Console, understanding AWS Simple Storage Service, also known as AWS S3. What is Amazon Web Services? Amazon Web Services is an online platform which provides many services that are easy to integrate within your application. Amazon Web Services is quickly becoming an industry standard because of its ease of integration, scalability, and security. Some examples of services AWS provides are anonymous functions that exist without the need of you provisioning your own server infrastructure, known as AWS Lambdas, authentication, automated tasks, and storage. So this section is going to be all about Amazon Web Services and cloud storage, which is something that is commonly used within development needs. So the first thing we are going to do is create an AWS account. So you will need to create an AWS account for this section of the course. You can do that by going on the link aws.amazon.com. You should see a page similar to this. You may pause the video and create an account now. So I'm just going to go on an incognito tab and show you the basic steps of how to do this. So first you'll need to sign in or create an account. Of course, if you haven't created an account yet, you'll have to create one now. And this will allow you to put in your email, your password, and your AWS account name. I'm not going to do that because I already have an existing account. One thing to note is you'll need to provide your credit card information to AWS, and that's because a lot of these services, there is a tier beyond the free tier. So if you use a lot of storage, and you will have to pay for that storage. Of course, we won't be using that much storage in this course because of course we're just building demo applications, so we're not using that much storage. But you can Google more about the AWS pricing on your own time. So let's explore the console a little bit. And you see in this console here, we have a bunch of different services. But the first, we are going to be using S3, and we can do that by typing it in here. And you see you have a S3 console. You have this S3 area. Yours will be empty because of course you haven't created any buckets yet, which we'll talk about later. Yours will be empty, but this is just the general overview of what it is. You can take a minute and pause this video and explore the AWS console. The next thing we are going to do is find our access keys. And our access keys will allow us to access AWS and S3 programmatically through our terminal and through our Node.js applications. So of course we're going to log on to console.aws.amazon and of course log into your account, and then we're going to click IAM. So we can type it in here, IAM. This is a dashboard which allows us to do user management. So this will allow us to manage which users are accessing our account. And the reason for having many users is because, for instance, we might have a professional AWS account. For instance, imagine if we were a company. A company might have multiple users. So, for instance, a developer A might have access to S3, developer B might have access to Lambda, developer C might have access to S3 too, but only has read access, not write access. So this is where you would configure all that. And we're not actually going to be talking about much in terms of IAM. In this course, we're mostly going to be talking about S3. But in order to access S3 programmatically through our terminal and through our Node.js applications, we are going to have these access keys. So we're going to click on users, and you will likely only have one user. Of course, you can add more, but for now, just click the one user you have. That's going to be your root user. And most of the time, you are not going to use that root user for anything besides adding more users. Because that root user has the most privileges possible. So you don't want to give that user to anybody else, to like any of your developers that are on your team, because then they can mess around with your credit card information, your email address, etc. You just want to create a new user for them. But for this purpose of this demo, you're going to click the one user you have. So we're going to click it and then go to security credentials. And now we are going to click create access key. And this key will allow us to access AWS programmatically. So you just download that CSV file, and that CSV file will allow you to, let me make this bigger, contain your credentials, which we'll use programmatically later. Don't use my keys. I'm going to delete these keys as soon as this section is over, but create your own, please. Just store those keys for now, and we will use them later. And now let's talk about AWS S3. AWS S3, or AWS Simple Storage Service, is a service which allows developers to simply and securely store objects for their application. Some examples of these things they may store are HTML files, images, videos, documents, etc. These objects can be uploaded or retrieved either programmatically or through the AWS console. What are buckets and objects? Buckets are the storage containers. Each application typically has its own bucket with different access privileges. For example, you may only give certain developers of this application read access, and you may give other developers read and write access. Objects are the files which you store into buckets. Each object has its own access privileges. So for instance, if you had a HTML file that you put in a bucket, you can give that HTML file public read access and maybe only public write access for certain developers. So you can think of buckets as storage containers. Like for instance, if we were talking about Google Drive, that would actually be the Google Drive folder, and objects as the files you put into that folder.